a conductive wire, and you were so electric. I had no say when you came so near, and just passed right through me.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is Back. Today I'm joined by a brand new guest, Chris Swinney from That One Time on Tour and formerly of the Ataris. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. I'm stoked to be on a podcast that is not my podcast. So thank you for asking.
Of course, I know how you feel. I'm so often doing my podcast that I'm like, oh, what's it like to be a guest?
I'll tell you, it's a lot less work. Probably not for you since you are hosting, but yeah, I enjoy when I get to go on other shows because I don't do the research. I open up the Zoom call and I'm ready to go. So I'm ready. Yeah. So today we are talking all about Back to the Future. This is an episode I've actually wanted to do for a while. I've only seen the first movie to my recollection. I've seen it 2 or 3 times now. And so I have, 2 and 3 up in the queue next for getting to those and seeing how those turn out. But this came out in 1985, directed by Robert Zemeckis. I hope that's how you pronounce that. That is how you pronounce it, yes.
To just dive right in, the cast is pretty fun for this movie. You have Michael J. Fox as Marty McFly, Christopher Lloyd as the perfect Doc Brown, basically. I can't imagine anyone else in that role. You have Leah Thompson as Lorraine, Crispin Glover as George, and those two are Marty's parents. And then you have Thomas F. Wilson as Biff the Bully, as I like to call him. You have Claudia Wells, Mark McClure, and Wendy Jo Sperber, and those are kind of your main characters. There are people who pop in and out, but never long enough to really focus on those characters. And even, Claudia Wells as Jennifer, she's not in it all that much.
No, and I'll tell you, this kind of might be jumping forward, but when you watch Back to the Future 2, you're going to notice that Elizabeth Shue takes over the role of Jennifer and Claudia Wells is no longer a part of the universe.
That's kind of crazy. Yeah. And like you said, we'll kind of dive into the story here in a second, but I think this cast was very strong. I don't know how well known all of them were at the time, but obviously Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd have had big careers. Crispin Glover and Thomas F. Wilson kind of just pop in for a lot of things. They do, I think, mostly character roles, it seems. And I'm not 100% sure what Leah Thompson's been in, but I'm like, she has been in stuff that I have seen.
Well, she was in Howard the Duck. I don't know if you've seen Howard the Duck. If not, you need to watch that. She was actually she was a kid star. She was in quite a lot of stuff. I think some TV stuff and a lot of movies before Back to the Future. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, she was third billing under Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd in the credits and whatnot.
That makes sense because the order I type them into our fancy little Google Doc here is, I think, the order they were billed in for the most part. I kind of just grabbed the top build and, a couple others and went from there. But Michael J. Fox gives a very charismatic performance in this, and Christopher Lloyd gives sort of that wild-eyed, crazy doctor performance. And obviously he's not a doctor, he's a scientist. So I think that played really well into the story as a whole.
One thing also, I didn't realize that you've barely seen this and that you haven't seen the other two. So I feel like I'm kind of more of an expert than I thought I was. Originally, Michael J. Fox was not cast. They shot half the movie with, what is the guy's name? Not Eric Roberts. I can't remember the guy's name, but a different actor.
Eric Stultz,
yeah. And there's basically half a movie with him playing Marty that you can watch online.
Oh, that's crazy.
Literally, they did half the movie or at least, they don't do it in order. They did half of the shots with him, and the director and everybody didn't really like his performance, and they tried to get Michael J. Fox and they got him. So they scraped everything and reshot everything with Michael J. Fox.
Wow.
And it would be a completely different movie. Eric Stultz is great, but if you go back and watch those shots and then you know the movie the way you know it, it would have been completely different. The chemistry was different between Christopher Lloyd and him and all the other characters as well. And I think this is going to be a fun episode because I didn't realize you were sort of a newbie to this universe.
Yeah. I had seen it a while back, but it was probably so long ago that I didn't even really remember that I had watched it. So watching it again, I was like, okay, I remember this part and some of this stuff. But the fact that they did this on a budget of $19 million too, given what you just said about doing all of those reshoots, because anytime people hear the word reshoots, they kind of freak out and they're like, oh no, what happened? What went wrong with the production of this movie? Because we've seen it happen with really, really big movies. You know, Solo went through that for Star Wars.
Yeah.
A bunch of the superhero movies go through that. I think The New Mutants is probably one of the more recent examples, and it kind of got shelved for so long that people were like, is this even going to come out? And so to find that out, it actually is pretty amazing that they were able to get this done and still on such a small budget. I know that's a lot of money for the 80s, but it made like 330 something million at the box office. So they definitely had a hit on their hands.
Well, and I mean, if you look back at it too, exponentially since it came out over 30 years ago, it's got to be one of the top 10 or top 5 like most highest grossing movies. I mean, with the DVD sales, Blu-ray, everything. And I mean, anytime you can flip through channels and it's normally on some channel. So when it goes into syndication like that, I mean, it's a huge movie. And I will tell you, the sequels, I am a fan of sequels. I think sometimes they do it right. A lot of the times they do it wrong. My estimation, what I say on the sequels is I really like the third one. The second one was a big commercial for the third one, pretty much. But they were also filming both of the sequels like at the same time, pretty much. So, and I mean, another thing you were talking about casting, Michael J. Fox in 1985 was one of the largest stars on television that you could find, you know, on Family Ties, and he had done some other movies as well. So to get him after the whole debacle with Eric Stultz was really big. If you watch, I'm not sure, there was some documentary that I watched about the making of Back to the Future. And from day one, the producers, the casting, and everybody, director, they wanted Michael J. Fox, but he was so busy with his TV stuff and his other movies that they couldn't get him. So then when he became available, I think that kind of pushed them in the direction to get rid of the old shots and start over.
Yeah, it's always fun to see how these things come together. And I watch some of the deleted scenes, and you can tell they found the footage way later because some of it was really rough. It had like the crackling on the screen.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, oh my goodness, just going from watching the movie, because I had bought my dad the trilogy. We had it on DVD, but it went missing somehow. And I was like, I want to watch these. You know, mostly I wanted to watch the first one for the podcast. So I think it was last year I rebought the trilogy for his birthday or something. And that's how they make a ton of money on home video too. You know, they do the DVD box set, but then people want to upgrade to Blu-ray. And so they buy the Blu-ray, and they sell it as a trilogy so often. You know, I think there's a 25-year anniversary one, and now there's a 35-year anniversary one. So that's how they definitely boost their money making on those, because they're like, you know, maybe we can't sell the second and third as well on their own. So they just box set them, and then, you know, people are going to be more likely to buy them that way, I think, just to have the complete set, even if they might not be as fond of the other two. And, you know, I hadn't really heard anything about 2 and 3. Everyone sort of talks about the first one, and then it kind of falls off from there, which I think is common because you can say the same thing about Jaws as well. Everyone talks about the first Jaws movie, not so much 2 and 3D and whatever else they have going on.
Well, I mean, even movies, you know, like, how old are you, by the way?
28.
Okay, you're 28. So I am 42. So Back to the Future to me was one of those like kind of woodshedding, like movies that made me who I am.
Right.
You know what I mean? And movies like that for me growing up in the 90s were The Goonies. And I mean, even like 80s movies when I was young, but like The Goonies, Ghostbusters, you know, stuff like that. So when you look at Ghostbusters being another one of my favorite movies in the entire world, Ghostbusters 2, not so much. I mean, I still really enjoy it because it's the characters and it's the story, but standalone movies, I think the first one, because it gets you in the door, it introduces you to the characters. It really, you could put it up against like bands. You know, when you listen to a band, that first initial record that got you into the band is normally your favorite record. You might like the other stuff better than other bands, but you always kind of have a favorite. And I think with Ghostbusters and with Back to the Future, as much as I love number 2 and number 3 in the trilogy, the first movie really has a place in my heart, and I could kind of take or leave the other 2 movies. But when you watch them as a whole, it does kind of do something, like, because those characters, it's a bigger journey and there's a little bit more character development. When I said that the second one was like a commercial for the third one, it's because in the third one, you get to kind of hear more about Doc's story. Marty is in the movie. He's a main character, but the whole thing kind of revolves around Doc Brown. In the second one, there's just very little character development. It's a really good adventure and there's time travel and it's awesome. But in the first one, you find all out about Marty and his parents. In the second one, there's not much content. There's not much deepness of anything. And then the third one, you find out all about Doc. So it's a really good trilogy, but the second one is just kind of flimsy as far as the other 2 go.
Got it. Yeah. And I actually wanted to discuss sort of the various relationships that Marty has in this first movie, because a lot of it does center around his parents, but you know, the kind of twist is that he goes back in time and kind of messes up his parents meeting and falling in love and has to fix it. And I think off the bat, though, one of the things that they don't dive into a whole lot is his relationship with Doc Brown, because we see him go to, you know, the little lab kind of room that's not really a lab, and then the giant speaker, and, you know, music nerds probably love that moment because you're like, yeah, I want a speaker that big.
The problem is, being a guitar player and an audio engineer, a speaker that big looks really cool, but it would sound horrible.
Yep. Yeah.
Like, not even if you had the right amp to push it, like, there's no reason to have a speaker that big ever, especially for a guitar. If you're going to, you know, a loudspeaker, like you're going to announce something on a microphone, that might be great. But for a guitar, that would not work. No.
Yeah. So, you know, it's one of those things where it looks nice. Not realistic at all, but it's a nice thing to think about, you know, for some music nerds probably, like, oh, what could that be like? And then you're like, no, maybe not. Maybe we should not have those.
I wish, you're talking about the relationship, and that's one thing that always kind of bugged me, because, you know, Marty is supposed to be, I don't know if he's a senior or a junior. They never really tell. I think he's an upper classman, so he's probably not a junior, like a freshman or a sophomore.
Right.
So I would say 16, 17 years old. And his best friend is a mad scientist that lives on the edge of town, who you never really find out how old he is, because when you go back 30 years, he looks the same. Yeah. I mean, they really did no makeup or prosthetics or anything. Yeah. Like, his hair's white in 1955. His hair's white in 1985.
They didn't even try to make him look younger at all.
Yeah, you have no idea how he is. And the one thing that it always brought up this thing in my mind, and you try to like make a backstory, because they don't tell you a backstory. So I'm not one of the people that think, oh, it's weird that this 17-year-old's hanging out with this mad scientist, but there has to be some sort of reason that they got together, some reason that they're friends, and they never tell you why they're friends. It's kind of strange.
Yeah, and you're kind of like, okay, well, Marty obviously isn't this loner geeky kid, because he's dating Jennifer.
He's got a hot girlfriend. He plays in a band. I mean,
yeah, it kind of makes no sense, but they gloss over it and then just throw him back in time. So you kind of forget about it, because there's a lot of time that he spends that isn't with Doc in this movie too. You have that whole scene where, you know, some of the language doesn't play as well today as it did back in 1985, but you know, that's how it's going to be when you're watching older movies. And I kind of go into these things knowing that. So you have the whole scene where they're being gunned down in the parking lot. For whatever reason, I don't know if it's because they want the car because they know it's a time machine, or if Doc did something else. That part's not even really clear either, but this movie is just so fun, and it's really fast paced as well. It's almost 2 hours long, but it never feels like it. You know, I was watching it and I was like, oh, we're already almost halfway done with it. You know, you're kind of like, oh man, I kind of wanted a little more. And I think that's when you know you have a really good movie, even though there are holes in the story, you're willing to forget it because of how good of a time you're having while watching it.
Yeah, and what you're talking about with like, there are quick cuts. The scenes don't drag on forever. It's probably the best version of a movie for the YouTube generation that came out in 1985 because I mean, you get excited. My son is 4 years old and he can't sit through Frozen or anything like that, or even an episode of Paw Patrol, but he'll sit there and watch Back to the Future with me because there's bright colors and there's a car, and you're completely right. Like, they did a really good job, because when you're done with the movie, like last night, I watched it in preparation for the millionth time. And when I was done watching it, I'm like, I feel like I just pushed play. And that could be that I know the story so well, but I think it's also cinematography, director, editor, like all of that stuff. It just works perfectly together. I think it's a perfect movie, but I'm biased, I think, because I grew up with it. So I saw it in the theater with my dad when I was really little.
I did not.
I know.
Sorry to age you, Chris.
Well, no, but that's the thing. My wife is 29. And so we always talk about movies, and she's seen a lot of the movies that I grew up with, but to her, they're just movies. And to me, it's like, that's my childhood. Like I'm invested in the Goonies. Like, it's not just a movie, you know?
Yeah. And we touched on how Marty and Jennifer don't really get all that much time together. So we don't really get a full idea of what their relationship is like. You can tell things are going fairly well, I think, at the beginning. And then when he returns, he's like, I haven't seen you in a week. And she's like, it's been like a day, you know? So you have that juxtaposition there that I think makes it even more fun, because Marty at the end is kind of trying to figure out what exactly happened and how long he's been gone. And it really does a nice job of taking him out of time. And then when he comes back, it's not like everything is perfectly normal. He's still kind of out of place and out of time. And I love that they weren't just like, okay, we're back and that's it. You know, they put that little twist in. But before we dive into what that twist was, I want to talk about Marty in the 50s, because you can't talk about this movie without talking about Marty in 55. You have the perfectly looking diner for the 50s. You have the costumes, which, you know, they're just regular clothes, but for movie terms, they are costumes. And they really just nailed the whole feel of the town in the 50s.
Yeah, they, from what I have read and seen in different like shows and stuff, they actually built that whole that whole town of Hill Valley on the back lot of the Warner Brothers soundstage. And I didn't grow up in the 50s, but everything that I've ever seen, like actual footage or actual pictures from the 50s, like they nailed it. Like everything was so clean and the colors were so bright and vivid. It just, it really does. When he goes back to the past, he crashes the car, he hides the car, and he like walks into town. By the time he gets to town, the sun's up and it's like the birds are chirping, and he walks into the town square, and like it has a feeling to me, like visually, and kind of the way it makes you feel like if you've ever watched The Wizard of Oz, when she wakes up and everything's color.
Right.
Like it does almost change the movie, the feel of the movie, the cinematography, everything just kind of changes. And I've always wondered if that was kind of like something they meant. I mean, I'm sure they did. I'm sure they talked about it and everything. But before he goes back to 1950, you know, Hill Valley's very gritty and just looks like a normal suburban neighborhood in wherever California they're at. And when he goes back to the 50s, it's a definite shift in how everything looks and how the feel and the vibe of the movie is.
You also see his neighborhood that he currently lives in being built.
Lion Estates.
Yeah, and it's not even being built. It's like they just have the signs up and that's it. And they're kind of like plowing the field to, get everything level and get everything ready. So they're not even in the process of building his house that he's been living in at that point. So he kind of has this, oh crap moment. And he's like, I need to find Doc Brown. And it's funny because where we see Marty at the beginning of the movie and where he goes to find Doc Brown, it doesn't look like it's remotely the same house at all. So you're starting to wonder, okay, what happened to Doc Brown to where he goes from this, fairly big house. And obviously he has the garage area that is where he does all of his experiments. And you're just kind of like, man, something had to have happened within those 30 years that just made him lose his mind a little more, because it's not that his personality is drastically changed between the two timelines. You can tell that in the 50s, it's leading up to how he is in the 80s already at that point, but to lose what he probably has owned for a while at that point, it seems, because it's not like back then people really rented houses or anything like that. And people probably lost their houses a little less often because they weren't outrageously priced as compared to today.
Well, one thing that my friends and I, because I mean, the funny thing is talking to you about Back to the Future, I've had these discussions before. They've just never been on a podcast. So the one thing that we always talked about was what you just brought up. Like, what happened? It's not like Doc Brown lives in a shitty place in 1985, but he doesn't live in this huge, like almost mansion looking place. And what we kind of came up with, he says a line in the first movie when they're at Twin Pines Mall and, Einstein has been the first time traveler, his dog. Yeah. And then he tells Marty, he's like, I came up with a flux capacitor. It's taken me 30 years and my entire family fortune to come up to realize my vision of that day. So when you start thinking about, maybe there were some shots they didn't put in, maybe there was some character development they didn't put in, but when he says that it's taken him 30 years and his entire family fortune to realize his vision of the flux capacitor, it leads you to believe that to figure out time travel and to put, because you're going to have to invest money, you're going to have to figure out all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
Maybe the reason he doesn't have that house anymore, maybe it was a family house. Maybe at one point he was loaded. Now he's not loaded because he spent all his money to figure out the DeLorean. And because, he had to buy the DeLorean too. I'm sure it was pretty expensive.
Yeah, because it almost seems like it's something he could have built from scratch, because obviously the inside of it does not look like the inside of the ones they actually sold in real life, which, they're not the prettiest looking car in the world, but they did manage to sell some of them thanks to this movie. And, there's obviously a whole lot of customization that went on, even if it was a car that he bought and then turned into it, or if it's something he built from scratch, especially back then too, because I can't imagine too much of the stuff he was working with was really easy to come by. And you see at the beginning too, what is it, like the case of plutonium or something that Marty's skateboard rolls into, and you're like, oh boy, we're in for trouble.
Yeah. I like how they foreshadow that. And then, because if he would have never told you, oh yeah, I got it from these Libyan nationals, then you wouldn't have known like why the skateboard went into a big road case that says plutonium on it.
Yeah. And I also really love when he's back in the 50s and, skateboards hadn't been invented yet. And he just kind of gets this makeshift one off of this kid's like scooter that was clearly just put together with pieces of wood and random wheels they found at like a hardware store or something. And everyone's like, oh, cool. So Marty is just doing things that he's used to, not really understanding the impact he's going to have while he's doing those things. Back in the 50s, like when he saves his dad from getting hit by his grandfather. And it's just this whole thing that comes full circle in the end. And I really love how he has to have that meeting with Doc Brown to realize, oh, I screwed things up. And it doesn't even dawn on him when they talk about at the dinner table how the parents met. It takes him realizing, oh, hey, I'm at my mother's house and she is weirdly hitting on me, which is a whole other thing you're just like, I'm really uncomfortable, but this movie's still really fun.
The one thing that always kind of got to me, like you were talking about how Marty, he's in the 50s. He's not trying to change his behavior. I always thought the skateboard thing kind of reminded me of Forrest Gump, where Forrest Gump puts himself into every situation and it seems like he influences every situation. But the thing with Marty, okay, he was at Twin Pines Mall. Doc was telling him all about everything. He was documenting it. He saw Einstein, go the minute into the future. He knows about 88 miles an hour. He saw him put the plutonium in. So he's being chased by the Libyan nationals. He says, let's see if you bastards can do 90. I feel like he had this big lapse of judgment. Maybe he was just really scared and he was getting away from the Libyan nationals. But when he hits 88, all the lights come on. He goes back to the 50s. He then acts for a while like he doesn't understand what just happened.
Right.
And that's the one thing in the movie that really bugs me. He's a smart kid. He was there and saw the entire demonstration. He even saw the time circuits, 1955, everything was there. But when he gets out of that barn after the guy comes out and old man Peabody's shooting the gun at him and everything, he acts like he honestly doesn't understand. And I know they're just trying to add drama and kind of take you on that story. But if it was me and I had gone through that entire evening and seen how everything worked, and then I was running from those guys and I went back into the past and I'm sitting there in the car and I'm like, man, everything's different. Oh yeah, I'm in a time machine. I would have just understood, and he never really understood until he got to town and everything's so crazy. That always really bothered me, that they're almost treating the viewer like they're dumb and they have to explain everything to you and spoon feed it to you. I think they could have done it a little bit different, but that's my only bitch about the entire movie.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I would rather be shown something instead of having them tell you what's happening, because Marty does kind of walk himself through it, thereby walking the audience through it, and you're just like, okay. And the fact that no one in the 50s knew what a radiation suit looked like, I don't know how realistic that is, but they all automatically assumed he was from another planet, which it works really well in the scene with his dad in the bedroom, because you kind of have this horror element to it. And I love the Darth Vader line. I was like, yes, okay, it makes sense that that is something that Marty would know, because we were 8 years past the first Star Wars movie coming out, and then it would be something that someone in the 50s would have absolutely no clue about. So I just like that little touch there. But I do agree with you that I don't like having things explained to me in the way that they explain things in this movie.
It's a little bit too much exposition. It's just I just feel like it would have been a better movie if he would have just been like, shit, yeah, I'm in a time machine. Oh my God, how am I going to get back? They could have the same narrative, same everything, just less of, they haven't built my house yet. What's going on? No shit, dude. It's 30 years ago. Just figure it out. But you said, the thing you said about Darth Vader, I always love that as well. But the one thing, I don't know if you caught it or not, but he says Darth Vader from the planet Vulcan. That's a Star Trek reference.
Yeah.
So the cool thing is they referenced, because everybody's either, do you like Star Trek or Star Wars? They always have that war going on, but they referenced both. And I think that was a very smart way to do it, so you didn't piss off either faction of fans.
Right. Yeah. I will admit that I have not watched any of the Star Trek things. I'm definitely a Star Wars person, but it's
I am too. I mean, I've watched both, but I'm more of a Star Wars guy, believe me.
Yeah, it's if someone wants to come on the podcast and talk about Star Trek, I'd probably watch some. I don't think I would do the shows at this point, because that's too much. But it's one of those things where I know there's quite a few movies, and it's just something I never got into because I ended up getting into Star Wars, I think. So, I get that for sure. But yeah, I was when he said that, I was that's not the planet, so that's definitely not a Star Wars reference.
Yeah.
And I've heard that planet name a few times. So I was like, okay, they're mixing it up.
I think that's where Spock You know, because I mean, even if you don't know Star Trek, Spock's got the pointy ears.
Yep.
I think Vulcan, I mean, I'm not an expert on Star Trek, but Vulcan, I believe, is the planet that Spock is from.
Yeah, and because his dad was into science fiction stuff, and it was just kind of like the perfect nod to those two big space opera science fiction kind of properties. And especially given the time period, you're just like, yep, that fits in perfectly. And it wasn't forced either, which I like it when they make these little nods to other pop culture properties and it's not like this weird force thing and you're just like, why are you doing this? Instead, you're like, yes, that makes perfect sense.
Well, and the tape that he put into the Walkman also said Edward Van Halen.
Yep.
Which I always thought that was weird, and I'm sure I think maybe I've just missed it if somebody explained it, but I would have thought it would have been it would have made more sense if it said Van Halen, like the band, because I didn't realize that you could just get a tape of Eddie Van Halen playing guitar solos. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I don't know. Nice nod to Eddie Van Halen, who just actually passed away recently.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of bizarre seeing that. I was like, oh, wow, what timing on my part.
Yeah. So what's the next topic you wanted to discuss?
I think we can sort of dive into the little twist at the end when he gets back, because it's not super long. And before we dive into that, I do agree with you that, you know, they probably could have cut like 5 or 10 minutes out of this movie if they got rid of the whole I'm confused why I'm in the past bit and just gone straight into him being like, I need to find Doc Brown. That would have been much more effective.
Like I said, there was no real reason. I can see him being in shock and like, wow, I'm the first person to time travel and blah, blah, blah. But the whole like not understanding for 10 minutes and then realizing he needs to find Doc Brown, like, yeah, he still could have gotten hit by the car and gone to his mom's and the whole deal. But right out of the gate, when he saw that his house didn't exist yet, he should have been like, shit, Doc Brown's alive. I need to go find him, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And plus he was listening and paying attention. The day he went to was the day Doc fell off the toilet hanging his clock and he had the vision for the flux capacitor. So like there was more information that Marty could have drawn from that he didn't. And I think it was just because they were spoon feeding the crowd. Hey, this is what's going on. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Or they just wanted to be like, here's a stupid high schooler, you know, as
that's
they tend
true
to do.
Too. Believe me, I teach kids guitar for a living, and they don't always have the common sense you would think they would have. So maybe in 1985 it was even less. I don't know.
Yeah. And when he gets back, he obviously knows that it takes him a minute to realize that he's back because he wakes up and he's kind of like, what's going on? And then he starts to hear voices, familiar voices, and he, you know, leaves his room and the house is all different. His parents are obviously much better off. It seems like they're in the same house though, which is a little strange because if they were that much better off.
It's the same house, but the house looks way more modern and nice on the inside. My favorite part of that whole thing, and this is like so weird and random, but he comes out and his brother has a suit on, and at the beginning of the movie his brother was catching a bus to go work at McDonald's.
Right.
So he comes out and he's like, hey Marty, he's like, hey Dave, what are you wearing? He goes, I always wear a suit to the office. It's like everything in his world is completely better, changed for the better, even his brother's job. Yeah.
And obviously what I guess happened is they bought the same modest house in this new neighborhood back in, you know, maybe late 50s is probably when they would have finished building those. And they built a better life from there. So the house didn't look quite as run down. And, you know, it's still a nice house. There's nothing wrong with the size of the house or anything. Obviously, it's big enough for them to have 3 kids there.
That's one thing we have to talk about as well, though, because in the first 1985, when they all lived there and Dave worked at McDonald's and everything, I understand having 2 adult children still living with you and then your kid in high school living with you. But in the new 1985, where Dave is wearing a suit to the office, why is he still living with his parents?
Or is he just there for breakfast? You know, who knows?
True. I mean, they don't really go into that. So it still seems like it's the same setup, but life is better. But Marty's sister and brother are out of high school.
Right.
And I don't understand why they're still all living at the house. But I mean, maybe they are just there for breakfast. They love each other. Who knows?
As someone who is currently living with my parents, it happens.
It does, yeah.
I don't wear a suit to an office, though.
Is your dad a best-selling science fiction author?
No.
There you go.
But yeah, it was one of those things where, again, you kind of overlook these little weird things because you're like, oh, okay, you know, whatever. It's the family, you know, and things are different. And then, you know, Marty opens the garage and he has this nice truck and Biff is the one waxing the vehicles, which I think is the funniest change for this, you know, new present day, because we see in the 50s how much of a complete jerk Biff is. And even though the events change to where George finally stands up for himself and stands up for Lorraine, you still have this outcome where the two of them end up together, but it drastically changes everyone's lives just because Marty kind of interfered without too drastically changing the future. Like, the people still end up with who they're supposed to end up with, but the circumstances change.
Yeah, and I've always just thought it was hilarious that, like, Biff was the biggest prick you've ever met in your life. He gets laid out one time by George McFly, and he's this little wussy dude now that here's your new book, Mr. McFly. Like, it's just, I love the fact that it happened in the movie and it's very enjoyable, but I just don't, getting knocked out one time doesn't change your whole personality.
No, I'm kind of wondering if maybe George standing up to him and, you know, the crowd kind of rushes over at the car and they see that it's Biff. And I think maybe the humiliation, everyone kind of turned on him, and then he kind of ended up having a similar life to what George originally had.
There is another thing that we can't kind of gloss over. The Forrest Gump aspect of it. Like when Marty plays Johnny Be Good and he's like, Chuck, this is your cousin, Marvin Berry. You know that new sound you're looking for? Listen, it's like Marty influences everything.
Yeah.
Everything in the 50s. I love it. And my friends and I used to call that the Forrest Gump thing because, you know, Forrest Gump influences, like he wipes his face with his shirt and then there's the smiley face on the shirt. Like, I love the fact that they don't go into depth about that. They don't go into like, you know, Marty has all this money because he wrote Johnny Be Good. It's just like by chance, Chuck Berry's cousin was in that band that was at the dance.
Yeah, by chance. And then you have that moment where Marty just goes all out. And then by the time he's done with the song, everyone has stopped dancing and is just staring at him and is like, what are you doing?
Maybe you guys aren't ready for that one, but your kids are going to love it.
Yeah.
We used to recite it, man. I probably know every line to the movie, which I'm not like super proud of, but my friends and I could probably recite the entire thing.
Now we all know what Chris spends his extra time doing.
Yeah. Watching Back to the Future religiously.
It really does feel like it's one of those movies where if you love the movie, you tend to watch it multiple times, and a lot of Star Wars fans are the same way. I'm not someone who rewatches things a ton, but I've been doing that more lately, whether it's for the podcast or I started a YouTube channel, so I've been talking about some of the Marvel movies and stuff like that, and it is something that you kind of can find comfort in because you're like, I know I love this thing. So instead of watching new things that you're uncertain about all the time, you can return to these things that you really enjoy. And Back to the Future really feels like it's one of those movies for a lot of people. I don't really think I've ever heard anyone say they flat out don't like it in some capacity.
Yeah. I mean, I think that when I say, for me, it's a perfect movie. It has so much nostalgia and it has so much like, you know, I remember when I was young, even after it came out on VHS, you know, we'd go to the video store and my dad loved it and we always watched it together. And there are movies like that kind of transport you back to being young. And it's definitely one of those movies. Even last night, I hadn't seen it for a while. I mean, it always kind of lives somewhere in my brain, but I turned on Netflix last night and I watched it and I was picking up on things that I'd forgotten, like different lines. And I remember like the guy that, Mayor Goldie Wilson, you know, like they do that thing. And I remember my friends and I like saying that and just, It really did. Like, it's one of those movies where no matter how many times I've seen it, okay, here's what it is. And my wife and I talk about this all the time. If it's on TV, like on USA Network or some stupid cable network, even though I own the Blu-ray and I have Netflix, I will watch it on TV just because it catches my eye and I know how much I love it.
Yeah.
And that's the weird that you would think, like, I own it. I could watch an unedited version with no commercials, but I would rather watch it just because, oh, Back to the Future's on. Boom. And then I just sit there and watch it. And there's a lot of movies like that for me. And when you wanted me to come on here and you're like, what do you want to talk about? And this was the movie. You know, we haven't even scratched the surface. We need to talk about his relationship with his parents in the 50s.
Yeah.
Because have you ever thought, maybe before this movie or even after this movie, if you could go back to when your parents were in high school and actually interact with your parents, do you think you would like them? You would want to be their friend? Like, think about that. Like, give me your answer for that.
I think it's a very interesting thing because right off the bat, you have that whole bit with Marty and Lorraine where she's obviously very infatuated with him. And I think that changes the whole dynamic because Marty very much so wants to get away from his mother. And he's kind of butting up to his father in order to get him in, you know, Lorraine's scope there so that the two of them can end up together. And I don't know like a ton about what my parents were like in high school. I know like broad strokes, and I don't know. It's hard to say because, you know, in a lot of ways now I'm a lot like my mom. We both love reading. You know, you can see the massive bookshelves behind me, and that's only 3 of 5 in this room. Yeah. And, you know, so I think it's hard because I would have had things in common with both of them, but like they didn't go to high school together.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that felt a lot more common for the 50s in particular, where it's like you go to high school, you sort of marry your high school sweetheart. And that was very much not how it was, I don't think, when my parents were in high school.
Yeah.
So
I think
it's kind of hard
to tell. You hit on something right there. I think that maybe this movie wouldn't be as, I guess believable is not the right word, but back in the 80s, your parents probably did meet in the same town or meet in the same high school. And nowadays, I mean, my wife and I didn't go to high school together. Right. You know, like I think maybe it was a little bit more of the norm to kind of marry your high school sweetheart. So I think that kind of almost cements the movie as a classic movie because that doesn't happen all the time anymore. Right?
Yeah. Because my parents went to different high schools. They met much later. So it's a very different dynamic. So if I ended up at the same high school as one of them, I wouldn't have even known the other one. So, you don't really know what that's like for other time periods. And I think the 50s and 60s were very much a different time even than the 80s, because obviously Marty goes to the same high school that his parents went to, but this also has a very small town feeling to it. You know, my parents went to high school in Orange County, California. So a very, very big place.
Well, see, and I think that's something that I didn't even really pick up on because, you know, I'm from Indiana. I lived in other places. I've been to California and everything, but I live here. And when I was going to high school, I had 82 kids in my graduating class. So like I knew everyone in my class.
I had 600-ish.
Yeah. My wife grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and she had like 1,000. So that's the thing. Like for me, when I watch this, I'm like, oh yeah, you go to the high school your parents went to, and you do this and you do that. And I mean, because my mom and dad went to the same high school. I went to a high school in a town over. So it's kind of the same thing.
Right.
But it just, I guess I've never really dissected that aspect of it, but somebody that did grow up in Orange County or that grew up in a metro area where it's a lot different, the schools are bigger, I can see that dichotomy there. And I never picked up on that because I went to a farm school out in the middle of a cornfield.
And obviously where Marty's house was kind of looks like it used to be a cornfield.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, a lot of Orange County used to be orange groves at one point in time. So I'm sure it was like that maybe back in the 50s and 60s, but by the time the 80s rolled around, it was very much more built up. And so it's just, like you said, a totally different thing. And I think that's very interesting, though, because then this story wouldn't have worked as well as it did. It wouldn't have made as much of an impact if this had taken place, say the 2000s and just going back to the 80s. It still would have been a very similar feel between the 80s and the 2000s, I think, in a lot of areas. Maybe in small towns it's still that way today, but it seems to be fewer and far between.
I feel like, and I mean, this might be totally off base, but I feel like when they were choosing what time periods they were going to focus on, the 30-year thing kind of makes sense because then, your parents are in their late 40s, early 50s, whatever. So I think it makes sense because there's a definite change in dress and everything from the 50s to the 80s.
Yeah.
And like you just said, from the 80s to the 2000s, there are some differences, but I think if you dress like somebody in the 80s in 2003, nobody's going to give a shit.
Right.
So, I mean, if you're from the 80s and you go back to the 50s, there's such a nostalgia and such like almost like just when I say 1955, you get visions in your head of what that is.
Right.
With the diner and with all the stuff. So there's such a difference in the 50s to the 80s. I think that's almost like another character in the movie.
Yeah.
The fact that it's so different, and he's got his, his sleeveless vest on, and like, hey, did you jump ship? Why you got the life preserver on? Like that's such a good thing to like. If he was wearing that in 2019, I wouldn't think he was a sailor, but in 1955 they do, like,
right.
I love that whole aspect of it.
Even musically, there was a huge shift between the 50s and the 80s because things are definitely more wild and more acceptable. Like, they're not shooting people from just the hips up anymore in the 80s. But from the 80s to the 2000s, you still have a lot of music, especially these days, that has synth in it. You have a lot of these elements that were taken from the 80s, and they don't necessarily sound too drastically different. Guitars are just as loud now, if not even louder in some instances. But from the 50s to the 80s, there was just such a shift that it makes this whole thing come together really well, because even just the fact that Marty is wearing jeans in the 50s, most people were sort of in just like slacks or, their suits, and nobody really had an understanding of what he was wearing even. And you look at what he was wearing and it's not like it was super 80s.
Yeah. It was just normal stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife makes fun of me because I still wear band shirts and stuff. Like I still dress like I'm in 8th grade. And like when I see what Marty's wearing, and it's kind of funny when he's got like the tucked in shirt and like the vest and everything. Like I think that's kind of 80s.
Yeah.
But it's something that someone would wear now. It's not.
It's like a long sleeve shirt with a vest. It's not like something wild.
Well, and going back to the 50s thing, I do think that there's something about, even like Norman Rockwell paintings or whatever. It's like the 50s is this thing that people look at as the last great time in America. Like it was safe to leave your door unlocked, and it was almost like this utopia time period, which I mean it probably wasn't. Probably in downtown Detroit in 1955 it wasn't a utopia,
right? But
people look at the 50s as being that way, and people look at the 80s as Ronald Reagan, AIDS, like Iran-Contra, like all this different stuff. So I can see there is a major dichotomy between the sweet kind of happy times of the 50s and then the 80s. And then if you go further into the sequels, they go into the future, 2015, which looks way different than it really looked in 2015. And then if they on the third one, they go back to 1885 to where they tackle the Old West. So I love the way that they kind of take these iconic time periods and each movie kind of has a different vibe. Yeah. That is one thing that's really good about the sequels, other than the future one, because as we all know, it's 2020 and we don't have flying cars. So,
right.
But they have this thing. I think it's cool in the second one. He's walking around downtown. It's 2015, and he goes into this place called the Cafe 80s. And they have like, arcade games, and they have, you got to watch the second one. You'll totally, it makes sense with this whole like time period thing we're talking about.
Yeah, it's on the list to watch the other two this week. This week being Christmas week. It's 2021 by the time everyone is hearing this, but I think these are just fun movies to kind of give yourself a break from things too, because I watch a lot of movies for this podcast. I just went through and I watched 6 seasons of Lost. That was a lot. Ooh. So Back to the Future after Lost is like very nice. It's not making me think too terribly much, but when you sit,
well, there's some time travel on Lost as well,
so much. It's way more confusing on Lost, let me tell you. But I think just watching these older movies, it's been a goal of mine to kind of go through and see which big ones I've missed. I watched Alien recently, not for the podcast necessarily, but just because I bought it and was like, I'm going to watch this finally. And I love that. I loved watching this again. I loved when I eventually watched Jaws. I had waited a while to do that for whatever reason, and that's probably one I'll revisit. Same with this. I could see myself revisiting this one, not necessarily every year, but probably every few years or something, because like I said, I'm kind of getting to a point where I just want something I know I'm going to enjoy, and I don't want to sit through something and be like, oh no, here we go. I don't know if I'm going to like this. I mean, I host a Stephen King podcast where I've watched a lot of bad movies because I'm doing all the movies, the books, the TV shows, and there's a lot more bad than there is good with those more often than not.
Well, if you become a Back to the Future super fan, there is fan fiction. There is an animated 4th installment of the movie that somebody cut together from the video game animation that was out in the 80s. And it tells more of Doc's story. It tells a lot of stuff. But if you really get into it, which you might, like me, there is a plethora. There is a wealth of Back to the Future stuff that is just out there for the taking. Just Google it, YouTube, whatever. And I mean, there's a lot of really good special features on the DVD or the Blu-ray if that's what you have as well.
Yeah, I have the trilogy on Blu-ray now, and I did watch the deleted scenes, but there was just so much on there that I was like, I can't do this all in one night, and I didn't get to it the next day. But yeah, there's a ton of stuff. I think there's like a whole documentary on there too, maybe, because I think the edition that I bought might have been the 25th anniversary one. So I know that one had like a ton of extras, and there might even be like a whole full disc of extras. That's how many they put on there. But yeah, I plan to dive into 2 and 3. But is there anything else you want to bring up before we wrap up here?
Well, I will tell you, if you watch the second one, Crispin Glover, who I loved everything he's ever done. I think he's a brilliant actor. I think he's kind of a weird guy, but I mean, most brilliant actors are weird guys. So on the second Back to the Future, they're in the future, and I guess he's got a hurt back. He's an old guy now, and he's hanging upside down by this little thing that's carrying him around because he's trying to like get his back right. And it sounds like Crispin Glover, and it looks like Crispin Glover, but it is not Crispin Glover because they couldn't come to an agreement on money, so he wasn't going to be in the second one, but they used his likeness with a different actor, and he sued them, and he made a shit ton of money.
Wow.
So he's not in the second one, even though everyone thinks it's him. It's not him.
That's kind of crazy. But yeah, I've definitely seen him in other stuff, and he's like good weird. He's not like bad weird.
Well, I don't know if you've ever seen Willard, where that movie is in about all the rats. You need to watch that.
Okay, I have not seen that. I think I've seen him most recently in American Gods.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Which that whole show is weird. So
he's in some movie that I watched recently, and it sucks that I can't remember the name of it. I think it's River's Edge. It's a movie from the 80s. It was before Back to the Future. I think maybe 83, 84. And it's got a really good heavy metal soundtrack, and it's about this guy like kills this girl by the river's edge, and then they have to try to cover it up. It's kind of a B movie. It's not the best quality, but he's in it, and he's really, really cool in the movie. He's like a punk rock kid in the movie.
Yeah, he's just popped up in so many things over the years. You're like, oh yeah, this guy every time you see him.
But no, I'm so excited that you had me on to talk about it. I love this movie. I mean, I knew I loved the movie, but when I was like actually thinking about, oh, I have to talk about this movie tomorrow, it cemented in my mind that this is like a staple in my life. And I don't know if I would, it's weird to say this, but I'm a big pop culture guy. Movies mean everything to me. Music is my life. So I kind of see that as hand in hand, you know, and this movie changed me. I don't know if I would have the same personality or anything if I didn't see this movie. Like the jokes have been with me forever. Like, I don't know. It's just one of my favorite movies of all time. And I love talking about it with you. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And, you know, I gave this, I think, a 4.5 out of 5. So it's definitely like a really fun movie that I really enjoyed. I don't give 5 out of 5s too terribly often, just because I feel like if I start giving everything that, I'm going to be like, I have too many favorites.
Well, it's just like people that use the word amazing. I'm like, use it sparingly. Use it when it means amazing.
Yeah.
So real quick though, what's the last 5 out of 5 you gave?
Okay, I gave a 5 to Paddington 2 because I really loved Paddington 2 for some reason.
See, I've never seen it. You're talking about Paddington Bear?
Yeah, so I did an episode with my friend that actually came out the day we're recording this. We did the 2 Paddington movies, and I had absolutely no attachment to Paddington at all. He wasn't someone I grew up with as a kid. I was very much a Scooby-Doo kid, but there was something about the movie, and I don't know if it's just because I don't watch comedic movies too often, but it's like that and this are the last 2 things I've watched, and it was just like a great combination between, you know, getting these fun moments that, you know, because like I said, I host a Stephen King podcast. So a lot of the times I'm watching these tense horror thriller kind of movies, you know. Shawshank is great, but it's not exactly an easy watch, you know.
Yeah.
So to get these 2 movies just kind of at the end of the year here, I was like, you know what? I really, really liked Paddington 2. You know, just a smidge more than the first one. But I think before that, honestly, it might have been like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
I haven't seen that yet, but it looks really good. I know that's a pretty good movie.
Yeah, that's one I think I might want to rewatch like every year because it was just so well done. And it just so happens that those 2 things involve animated characters. Obviously, you know, Paddington is not a real bear in a movie, but it was just something about it. I was just like, you know what? They really nailed these movies. And we talked about some of the plot holes with Back to the Future. And I think that's kind of one of the only things holding me back from giving it a 5 out of 5. I just had a few too many questions, but I still had a ton of fun with it.
Well, I tell you what, Paddington, if he had a Post Malone song on the soundtrack like Spider-Verse, then it would be 5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, it's pretty fun, you know, that you have in the first one, you have like Nicole Kidman as the villain. And then the second one, you have Hugh Grant as the villain. And it's just a ton of fun. And obviously, you know, clearly I like movies that aren't exactly made for me, but they're definitely made for me.
Well, I mean, I watched, what did I watch? I watched The Grinch with my kids the other night, and I had never seen The Grinch, and I loved it. Thought Jim Carrey was awesome. Like, I skip over stuff sometimes. Like, I think I'm a movie buff, but then people are like, have you seen this? I'm like, no, I haven't. Because I have like this stable of 10 movies that I watch over and over and over again, you know?
Well, I imagine you'll be watching more kids' movies in the future. And,
yeah,
you know,
we've done all the Toy Stories. We've done...
love those.
We've done all Finding Nemo, Finding Dory, all that different stuff. So yeah, we're starting into that. My kids love YouTube. They're that kind of like quick cut, you know, thing we were talking about earlier. But yeah, they're starting to get into movies. We still haven't made it all the way through Frozen, but they like Frozen. So I think that's the new thing. They're starting to get. We have Disney Plus now, so they can watch whatever they want.
Me too. So I can watch whatever I want. But yeah, Chris, thank you so much for coming on to discuss this one. I will definitely keep you updated on 2 and 3 as I watch them.
Well, when you watch 2 and 3, let me come back and we'll talk about 2 and 3. Yeah.
You are more than welcome to.
Awesome. Well, no, I really appreciate it. And yeah, anytime you want to talk about movies or something, let me know. And everybody should check out my podcast too.
Yes, I will link to that in the show notes. Check it out. If you love music, You will certainly find some guests to enjoy on the podcast. And, nobody's really been touring lately, but you still have the podcast to talk about that one time on tour.
Yeah, you can reminisce about when the pandemic wasn't here and we could all be in vans and playing gigs,
Exactly. Well, thank you again, Chris.
You got it. I'll talk to you very soon.
All right, everyone, that does it for this episode of Welcome to Geekdom. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so through our Patreon. You can sign up for $1 a month. That'll get you a thank you on the show. $2 a month, you get to pick a topic that myself and a guest will discuss on the show. For $5 a month, you can join the Welcome to Geekdom Slack group, where you can talk to myself and various guests who have been on the show. If you want to follow us on socials, you can do so at GeekdomPod on Twitter and at Welcome to Geekdom on Instagram and Facebook. And as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.